Okay, as I promised then, this afternoon my special guest is Gordon Stiles, a name that may well be familiar to you, having had some, should we say some business encounters with Darlington, but ones that didn't last very long. Good afternoon, Gordon.
Good afternoon. How are you doing there in England?
I'm very well. Now, you are in China at the moment. You're in Zhongshan, which is just across the bay from Hong Kong, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah. Zhongshan is the birthplace of China's first president, Sun Zhongshan.
Indeed.
And a very beautiful city.
Now, you are there for reasons which we'll go into shortly. Let's take it back to the beginning, though. You're from Middlesbrough originally, born and bred in Middlesbrough. Would that be right to say?
Well, actually, I was born in Wimbledon, and at the age of 10, my father relocated his small engineering factory to Thornaby in Teesside. And so I grew up really from the age of 10 on Teesside.
And obviously with a bit of an engineering heritage as well.
Oh, indeed, yes, quite so.
So you eventually you ended up with what was a very well-respected industrial operation in Darlington, your business being that of prototyping engineering items.
That's right. Well, I started off at the age of 18 with my father's small machining shop with about 6-7 people. And after he passed away a few years after that, I decided to get out of machining and get into rapid prototyping, which was a much more, if you like, sexy, marketable kind of industry. We built models using laser beams, growing models in a bath of chemicals, and it made the news all over the country, and we were one of the very first in Europe to do it. That company grew very well, and we ended up with about 75 people, about £4.5 million turnover. It was a very successful business for Teesside.
Yeah, that was Stiles RPD in Darlington. Now, you would have thought that you were in a pretty good position to carry that forward, but that didn't really happen, did it? You eventually sold that company in 2000. Just give me the background to why that happened. What looked like a successful company, obviously great to sell it, but why did you take that decision?
Yeah, it was a great disappointment that I ended up having to sell it. In 1993, I'd actually managed to raise about £500,000 by way of venture capital and other finance to be able to buy the equipment that you use for rapid prototyping. It's very, very expensive, high-tech equipment from America. We grew like crazy right through to about 1998. And around about that time, we were finding it more and more difficult to finance the growth of the business. We were profitable, but growing a high-tech business with a lot of capital equipment sucks in a lot of capital. So I went back to the venture capitalists concerned and said, look, we've got the opportunity to go from, let's say, 4 million turnover to 10 or 20 million turnover over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. But to do that, we're going to require additional capital. Now, by this point, that particular venture capitalist, like so many of them, were focused pretty much entirely on dot-com businesses, the dot-com boom of the late 90s. And so it became almost impossible to raise capital. I tried to have them bought out and bring in a new guy, but absolutely impossible. And all I was trying to raise was £1 million. Now, as it happened at the time, there was a German company doing exactly what we were doing, and they actually went to the stock exchange in Frankfurt and raised 20 million euros for an identical business in Germany. And that pretty much shows the contrast between, for example, small innovative companies in Germany and the UK trying to raise capital.
So a very difficult time for entrepreneurs, I guess, at that point. You ended up selling the company out then to a Japanese company, but you didn't. Most people, I think, at that point, if they'd met this brick wall, not being able to find the finance, might have abandoned ship at that point. You didn't, though. You headed off down to Rotherham, didn't you? I
decided to get back into industry as soon as I could, and I put together a business plan to get back into machining. And Rotherham at the time was offering these government-backed sort of regional venture capital deals. And so I went down there and set up a company. But although we started the company and we became profitable and successful within the first year, the problem then was we had a period of time where we were losing all of our contracts to companies abroad, particularly China. And it was losing a contract to a Chinese company who apparently could do the same amount of machining for one-tenth of our price. I was so shocked by that I decided to get on a plane and go to China and find out how is it even possible to do the job for one-tenth. I realized how low cost China was, but I also realized that if you're trying to buy something for one-tenth of the UK, it'll turn out absolute rubbish. And that's exactly what happened to the client involved, is that they went and bought it for one-tenth. But when it arrived in the Midlands, I went down to see the product, and it was an absolute unmitigated disaster. Now, that said, what I learned in China was that, okay, maybe not for one-tenth, but certainly for one-third or one-half of the price, you could actually do a Western-style high-quality job for, a third or half the price. And I'm sitting there with a business that's going down the tubes real quick, and I just thought, this is ridiculous. Why am I even in this country? The people who are buying stuff don't even care about quality anymore, or that's how it felt and appeared to me, which was very sad.
Yeah.
And, the government couldn't care less about industry manufacturing. You never heard Tony Blair or Gordon Brown talking about how important industry manufacturing and construction is. They weren't leading from the front. And you go into any bank, and you're going to be thrown clean out the door if you start asking for anything more than, let's say, 70% of an asset that you're handing over to them as collateral. So I frankly felt very, very despondent and thought, I'm just going to take my skills to another country where clearly in China they care about industry and manufacturing, and finance is readily available here. So I took myself off July 2005, and I never came back, so to speak, other than family visits.
Indeed. I mean, you went obviously to China. You said that Great Britain wasn't the place to be, and the reaction was bad there. Could you not have taken it a little bit close to home, to Europe or somewhere like that?
Well, actually, my first choice was Germany. And in the late 90s, I had actually, for a whole year, based myself out of Dresden in East Germany, where the labor cost was lower than the UK, and there was a lot of money available for investment in industry and manufacturing. But frankly, I'd already made the move once before to Germany. Also, I'd moved down to Coventry at one point in my career, thinking that was kind of, in the UK, it was further away, but it was more industrial. But frankly, I thought, look, if I'm going to make this move at the age of 40, I'm going to go the whole way. I'm going to go the whole way to the center of manufacturing on planet Earth. And Guangdong province, where I live and where I have my factory, you only have to drive around it once and you get the point. It is absolutely oozing factories. For anyone who arrives in Hong Kong, comes over the border into Shenzhen, they take a car and they drive up through Shenzhen, Dongguan, Guangzhou and down. It's literally like driving through one huge factory estate. I mean, the place is absolutely oozing factories. It is definitely the factory of the world. And as soon as I arrived, being a factory guy, being an engineer, in a really ironic way, I felt quite at home, to be honest.
I mean, obviously, going into a completely different culture, what were the challenges that you faced there?
Yeah, well, the first challenge here in China is the language. I'd learnt German before when I went and lived in Germany for a while, and I thought that was difficult until I arrived in China. And then you realize that Chinese is almost like an alien language. You've got to learn a new verbal language, but you've also got to learn the tones.
That's right.
And without the correct tones, you can't understand what's being said. And then you have to learn the writing, which is almost impossible. It's like being in a Star Trek movie,
Yes.
So,
how have you coped with that?
Well, I went off in 2008 to Berlitz in Guangzhou. I'd studied with Berlitz for German. And you sit one-on-one in a room, and it costs quite a lot of money. It's about £1,000 a week. And they sit there one-on-one and they coach you, literally word by word, sentence by sentence, conversational Chinese. And I've actually spent now 700 hours one-on-one in a classroom learning Chinese.
Goodness.
And I've reached about level 5 out of 8, I would say.
So you can get by?
Oh, I more than get by. I stand up in front of the entire company and address them in Chinese now. But that not very well. My American colleague who runs the factory, he actually he's practically bilingual, and he started learning about 8 years ago.
No way. So, beyond those challenges, though, what about the? I mean, we've pretty much, I think, underlined the fact that the UK is not the place, and the support isn't there for entrepreneurial activity. How have you found it in China then? What response is there to you as an outsider bringing your industry to them?
Foreigners are foreigners in China. Even if you're a white guy and you're born here to white parents, and you've got a Chinese passport, you will always be a foreigner. White people cannot be Chinese. It's that simple.
Yeah.
You will always feel like an outsider. So in my heart, I know what my purpose is here. The Chinese government has a contract, an unwritten contract with foreigners. You arrive, and they will let you do business here. They will let you make a really, really good profit. They'll let you enjoy the food and the environment and the culture. But at the end of the day, my job is to hand over my skills to the Chinese to allow that country to get better. That's the contract. I know they let me in to benefit from me. And part of that contract is I get a living in return. And I think any foreigner who comes here and thinks that somehow he's becoming part of the system or he's becoming Chinese, he's deluding himself, genuinely deluding himself. You are here to help them. And the benefit is you get some money back and you get to live a nice life. That's the contract. They treat you very, very well, though. They're very respectful. The police are incredibly helpful. The government are very, very competent and very helpful. And one of the reasons why China has been so successful the last 33 years is that the men, the top 9 men who sit in the standing committee, the Politburo, they are all engineers or practical technologists. Hu Jintao, the president, is an engineer. Wen Jiabao, the prime minister, is a geologist. They're all engineers, practical people. And that drives policy in China. These guys know instinctively in their DNA that industry, manufacturing, construction, and exporting is the only part of the economy that creates wealth, and that everything else only exists to support that activity. And another thing that makes China so successful is their rigid control over the banks. Now, if I'd had this discussion 5 years ago with a Brit, everybody would have been saying, well, it's because they're communist and they don't allow free market activity. It's not. We now know from looking at the UK and Europe, Greece, America, that if you let banks do what they want to do, you end up with the biggest bubble in history and the largest single financial collapse known to human beings. In China, they've had 33 years of straight-line economic growth because they meter the new money supply into the economy according to a plan, and they allocate that money according to a plan. And that is what is missing in America, in Britain, and in Europe, is absolute rigid control over the money supply. And until we take control of the money supply, Britain will experience boom and bust for the next 800 years, just as it's experienced boom and bust for the last 800 years.
Now, you've highlighted this, haven't you? You went as far as literally putting your money where your mouth is in terms of putting an open letter to the Prime Minister and spending your own hard-earned cash on having that published nationally to get across your 10-point plan, which pretty much echoes what you said there, along with lots of other things which I think would make your average Brit wonder quite where you were going, such as closing the Bank of England and making the tax threshold £25,000 before you start paying tax and that kind of thing. But you genuinely believe that that is the way forward for us here? Well,
absolutely. I mean, I think anybody in the street now, you ask them, why have we got this huge economic depression going on in Britain? And 9 out of 10 of them are going to utter the word banks. I think just about everybody, children, get the point that this is It's a financial crash. It is a banking crash. And yet, in the last 4 years, successive chancellors and successive prime ministers have failed to act on the fundamental problem of taking control of the money supply. And so right now, what we have in the UK is a recession that has been brought about by the last 8 months having a collapse in the broad money supply. Banks are simply not lending out enough money. And they're not lending out money because they consider the environment to be risky. Well, frankly, it's only risky because they are trying to make a profit. If a banking sector is not trying to make a profit, it is simply a public utility, then you dictate every single year that the money supply will go up by a given amount. And you can have what's called window guidance in banking terms, where you dictate exactly how much goes to industry, manufacturing, and construction. And just to give you a small fact about how much money goes into business, only 8% of newly created money in the last 10 years by the private banks has actually gone into business, has been lent to business, of which only 2 out of those 8 points have gone to industry and manufacturing, which is ridiculous when you consider that industry and manufacturing construction represent probably between 25 and 30% of the economy, and they're only getting 2% of the money. You know, the engineers and the scientists and the builders, they are being starved to death of cash that they need to grow businesses that create real wealth, create real jobs, and create products that we can export to other countries.
Do you think that even if that fix was put into the banking system and the financial supply system, do you think that even then we could compete in terms of manufacturing, top-line prices with China? Because obviously their entire wage structure is far lower than ours.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And the answer is yes, of course we can compete with them. All we have to do is to look to Germany and countries like that, and Switzerland, where Germany exports, I think they have the second largest exports of any country on earth. I'd have to look up the facts. These guys are making things that you simply cannot make in China. China may have low cost, but it also, as an average, has a much, much lower skill level. So we can make products that can be shipped from the UK into China and be even 10 times the price of the equivalent Chinese machine. And yet, that machine will not do what a British machine will do. And I've put my money where my mouth is on this, because in the last year or so, I've bought over $135 worth of equipment from a British company called Oxford Instruments. And the reason I bought it from them was because, well, you couldn't even buy it here in China. You couldn't buy it even from an American company.
So we're actually leading the world in certain technologies then?
We are leading the world in more technologies than you could possibly imagine. The problem is each individual one of those sectors is just too small and too underfunded to really get momentum and get out there and make some serious damage in the world.
I guess the flip side of that coin as well is why you mentioned the piece of equipment you bought there from Oxford Technologies. Now, you bought that, it's a piece of testing equipment, isn't it, which gives a go, no-go on certain metals regarding their specification. Now, is that not the flip side of that coin, in that in China you quite often don't know what you're getting for your money?
Yeah, and actually that's why we bought it's an optical emission spectrometer. It's a spark testing machine. In the UK, I was doing exactly the same product and service, but I would never, ever need such a machine, because if you buy some 304 stainless steel in the UK, there's a 99.99% chance it is what it says on the label. But here, I would say half or two-thirds of the materials that we receive into our factory have some non-conformance. And so really, I wouldn't have to need to buy that. I mean, China actually is one of the biggest, fastest growing markets for Oxford Instruments, especially for their handheld XRF, X-ray fluorescence roast testing guns,
Is that not a problem with the Chinese way of doing things, though, in some ways? This, what would you call it, corner cutting, shall we say, in order to get a product produced or produce a given item, not necessarily to the specification that would be required?
Well, it's symptomatic of it being a developing economy. I mean, can you imagine stepping back into Stevenson and Brunel's day? You know, steel arriving at the gate in Brunel's time. I mean, I guarantee you half of whatever was coming in was probably wrong.
Yes.
It is just a stage in the development of this country. But I'll tell you what, you know, in the 7 years that I've actually been in China, I've seen a massive improvement in the quality and the sophistication of products coming out of China.
You yourself, I mean, your business, you reckon it's growing at about 50% per annum.
Yes. Well, one of the wonderful things about coming to China is that as soon as you arrive as a foreigner, an English speaker, you are standing on an international stage. Whereas, for example, in my 17-year career at Styles RPD in Thornaby, I could barely export. No one was interested. No one looked at Britain and said, oh, that's a great place to buy product from. And frankly, we were the same price as the Germans or the French, so there was no advantage. But as soon as you arrive in China, you are literally on an international stage. We are selling, I think it's 37 different countries around the world. And yes, we're growing at 50% a year. And that's partly because we're a lower cost offering. But it's also because here I've been able to spend money on new equipment and very high-tech equipment and get a very high-quality product quite quickly. But I would like to make this point. We also sell into India. So about 15-20% of what we do is into India. We are considered a high-cost option in India. And the Indians are buying from China for what they perceive to be high-quality, fast service, quick delivery, but a slightly more expensive price. So that's very ironic, I think, given that we're in China.
It is, really. I mean, are you employing techniques in China then that are now not available in the UK? Or is it just that there is no impetus to use those techniques or to go down that route in the UK?
Not at all. We're doing exactly what my UK company did. I mean, absolutely no difference. In a way, that was the easy bit. I'd already built a rapid prototyping company. All I had to do was get off the plane and start building from my original business plan. You know, we are no different to any good quality rapid prototyping company in Europe.
I mean, you are obviously a very highly motivated. You've got some very strong opinions about how business should be run and how the state should support it to give it its fair dues. What about Gordon Stiles, the guy who has a bit of a rest now and again? Do you ever take a break from work? You sound as though you're doing it 24/7.
Yeah, pretty much 24/7. But I like to go for Chinese massage, and it's nice being in Southeast Asia because you can get off to Thailand and the Philippines and even Australia quite easily from here.
So how often do you get away then?
Oh, I get away about 3 times a year. But also, for example, I was just on a 7-week world tour, if you like, just going to see my salespeople in America, down in Brazil. I'd never been in the Southern Hemisphere before. Went to Germany, Portugal, France to see clients, the UK. So it's funny because the last 7 years, my whole horizon, has just opened up, and I'm traveling all over the world, and I find that fascinating. So you do a bit of leisure. Obviously, your focus is on business. I've got to ask you, though. I mean, you said that this unwritten contract with China is that you bring skills to them, and they provide for your business in terms of facilities and infrastructure and that kind of thing. Now, what's the lifespan of your business then in China? Is it not the case that they will then duplicate what you're doing, and suddenly your business will be playing second fiddle to a business of their own? Yes, you're absolutely right, of course. Since I've come here, I've imparted my skills to a lot of guys who work for me. 2 of those individuals have gone off and set up in competition with me. And so, yes, I mean, they're learning how to do this themselves. And I'm sure that we've learned things from the Americans and from the Germans, and integrated that into what Britain does. But what I have to do is I just have to move ever quicker. It's almost like I'm Britain competing with China. I have to just be more high-tech than they are. I have to do better quality service, better quality parts. I just have to keep ahead of them. And I believe I can do that.
And of course, your business is changing all the time, isn't it? I mean, prototyping. No doubt you're using techniques now, and techniques are available that were unheard of 13 years ago. 12 years ago when you were in the UK, because it is a rapidly moving and much needed element of industry, isn't it? Prototyping. Everything's got to start somewhere, and it starts in your factory, really.
Yes, whenever you walk into any appliance store, or you walk into a car showroom, or anywhere where there is something that you can buy other than, let's say, a house, that part has been designed by a guy using some kind of 3D CAD system like SolidWorks or Pro Engineer, and he will output that data, and he will send it to a company like mine, and we will make the very first iteration of that part in the real world. We will make a stereolithography or an SLS model, and it comes into reality for the first time.
And you can literally print things now. You can print solid objects, can't you, in a strange three-dimensional printer almost.
That is correct. There are all these new 3D printers like Z-Corp. Basically, you lay down a powder, and then using like an inkjet printer head, you bind some of that plastic together, then you put another layer on, you bind some more together, and it prints through to the layer below. And then when you're finished, you take this block of powder out, and you blow it off, and all the unbound material blows away, and you're left with a model. And it's absolutely fascinating.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's amazing to watch.
It is amazing to watch, and I predict, and we're seeing this already, that there will be home printers coming into the market very soon that are reliable. People are already buying for about $1,000 or $2,000 online a kit. I think it's called a Rapman kit or a RepRap kit. And you can actually build your own printer in your own house right now for about $1,000 to $2,000. And it won't be a long time until you can actually go into one of these appliance stores where you buy a typical HP printer and buy an HP 3D model printer. Seriously,
absolutely.
HP are already in the market.
It's just phenomenal, isn't it? It's almost Star Trek stuff, really.
It is indeed.
And you are at the forefront of that. I mean, you say that you have to keep ahead of the crowd, otherwise, I guess essentially you'll be the architect of your own demise eventually. But how do you source new technologies? Is it constantly travelling the world looking for new ways of doing things?
Yes, absolutely. One of the ways that I do it is I have 2 or 3 exhibitions I like to go to every year and listen to the speakers and look at all the new technologies that are on the stand. But I mean, nothing's changed in this respect. I mean, if you step back, 100 years or 150 years, the engineers of their day in Britain, So if you look at, William George Armstrong of Cragside, and he built new hydraulic cranes, and he got involved in armaments and so on. And he was traveling the world, and he had leaders from Japan coming to Cragside, and they were constantly learning about new technology and trying to stay ahead. So it's not a problem of today. Even 100, 200, 300 years ago, people were always asking the question, how do I keep ahead with the technology? And it's very simple. You just have to be open-minded and get out to exhibitions and learn everything you can. And, okay, you've got to take a few risks on buying certain pieces of equipment. But, it's fun. I'm an engineer, so for me, machines are not a liability. For me, they're toys. They're big boys' toys.
I think that's a great idea. I think I remember my mother saying to me a long time ago, you should have been an engineer because there was nothing in the house that didn't have the screw heads rounded off where I'd taken it apart to see how it worked.
There you go. That's my life. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean,
awesome.
when it comes to the future, then, do you ever see that if the economic climate changed in this part of the world, you would ever bring your skills and your abilities back to this country?
I would, but certain things would have to change. First of all, money would have to become abundantly available to industrialists, manufacturers. It is not today. There is no point me trying to raise money in the UK for a business, and I would need to raise money to do that. We're in a capital equipment business. So that's the first thing that would change. I don't see that changing anytime soon. No matter what George Osborne says about setting up a small business bank, they're just tampering with the system. They're not actually making any fundamental changes. The other problem is taxation. Why on earth would I pay more than 25%, or like in Hong Kong, 15% in the UK? Why would I pay that? The money, frankly, that is raised is wasted. The economy could easily be 50% bigger, and if everybody was paying lower taxes, we'd still be getting revenues. And let me just give you one little fact about taxation. The people who do the hard work in Britain, build the houses, build the machines, these people are paying typically up to 25% in salary tax at that lower level. But here's the thing. When people import product into the UK, the average tax import duty is only 0.4%. 0.4%. And yet you export anything from the UK into Brazil, and you'll pay 60% import duty plus VAT. It almost doubles the price. Why is it that we allow all of this product, not just from Europe and America, but from elsewhere, to come into our country almost tax-free? I don't understand it. It's because I think big business has managed over the years to lobby and influence government to drop all the import duties on just about everything arriving in the UK. You could raise £50 billion a year just by raising the taxes to an average of 10%, and that would more than pay for raising the tax threshold for workers to £25,000 a year and dropping the top rate of tax to 25%, just by putting 10% on import duties. Why can't we do that? The Chinese do it, the Brazilians do it. Most countries of the world charge British companies 10, 20, 30, even 50% on goods being imported into their countries. We should reciprocate and do the same to them.
There you go. You see, you have the answer. That's not just in prototyping, but in the whole system. Maybe politics would have been a good thing for you.
If I do one day come back to the UK and want to fix the country with, I don't know, hundreds of other people who are like-minded, I would love to do that. But I swear to God, I will never call myself a politician.
A good place to end. I'm sure that your business in China will go from strength to strength. We'll keep an eye on it from a distance. A pleasure to talk to you this afternoon, Gordon.
Well, thank you very much, John, for your time, and have a good day.